we are not in the same position as we were before. We are in emergency mode. It's not predictable. There is no indication, insight that this particular situation that is happening in Pune is going to end. It could be a month, 3 months, a year, or more. So the decisions that are made at this council would have grave impact on the county. I made some statements a week ago in regards to how this is not only affecting Hawaii County, but it's also affecting the whole state of Hawaii. As we look towards people canceling reservations in the hotel industry, cruise ships also canceling. Small mom and pop stores are laying off their workers. So we're talking about major impacts, not only for our island, but for the rest of the state as well. So we are very fortunate, very, very fortunate. The governor was able to get a proclamation done, remove the pentane from the geothermal area, and we were able to look at some of the wells, to close some of the wells, and we're monitoring all of these very, very carefully. But we also have support from the National Guard. The governor has given the authority to General Hara, who is a native of Waikea High School in this island, to have complete command over the National Guard and even Puakaloa to give us assistance. And by also getting FEMA here definitely helps ahead of time. So the county is going to be addressing property taxes. We're going to be addressing how the insurance companies can get their insurance for these homes that are over 40 homes that are burnt down by the lava, to be able to assess them so that they can, get moving into their lives. You have many of the departments here today. Park and Recreation is doing the best that they can to give the people on this island the opportunity for shelters. We are providing 3 meals a day at the shelters. We have shelters available for everyone. We still have a capacity of 800 people down in the Pune area. We have the Keao area as well. But also contingency plans have already been made in case this particular event goes south in other shelter areas as well. But all of this is going to incur cost. And I appreciate all of you what you're doing in addressing this concern. But unfortunately, the mayor is not here today. He's at Civil Defense, and it's not a good time. And I appreciate what you're doing. And if you have any questions for me or Deanna has all the information in regards to the the financial part. But I'm just giving you the overview.
Thank you, Deanna.
Before we go any further, I just want to clarify, it's not Target that's closing, it's Kmart.
Okay.
Kmart. Yes, sorry. So my phone was blowing up here. Yes. So yes, we just wanted to clarify that. But Deanna Sacco, Director of Finance, and so we did prepare a presentation as I promised yesterday, because there is a lot of information we all need to know as we jointly decide how we're going to move forward. So we are here today to present the mayor's amended budget that was submitted on May 4th. If we had submitted it on May 5th, it probably would have looked a lot different. The major changes from 2018, the current year we're in, to 2019, and this is overall in the budget, are primarily mandated increases. We have 9.9 million salaries and wages, and as you all remember, we collectively bargained together with the other counties in the state as we're required by law. We have 7.4 million in post-employment medical benefits, as well as our regular health benefits, and then 4.4 million increase in retirement contributions, and all of these are mandated by state law that we participate together with the state. We did have an increase of $525,000 in real property tax sale and expenses, but as a reminder, that's an offsetting revenue and an offsetting expenditure. It's not new cost. It's just how we account for them. Our debt service did go up slightly by $620,000. We did increase our claims and judgments account by $500,000. There is a large case that has been pending for several years that we believe will be being settled in the upcoming year, so we need to prepare for that. And then civil defense grant match, $175,000. We've been very fortunate over the years that civil defense receives a large number of grants from Homeland Security, and there's never been a match. And now in the coming fiscal year 19 grant, we will be required to match that at $175,000. Initially, this was something we actually added in the May budget, because initially I know they're usually about 2 years behind. They have 3 years to spend the money. So I thought the match wouldn't be needed for like 2 more years when they actually get ready to spend this money. However, the federal government would like to see the match in our budget so they know we are prepared to have that pay our share. So really, not too many different things that make up the major changes. Our pie chart does show, police, fire, and everyone. The big purple section is actually our fringe benefits, which is a significant portion of our budget, 22%. Just the changes from March, the more significant changes, real property tax revenue did increase by $1.7 million. That was just as we finalized values and got the final appeal amount. There was no, major changes. It assumed the same tax rates as the current fiscal year. There were some slight grant revenue increases. Because of that increase in real property tax, we were able to restore the council contingency funds of $270,000. We added $200,000 for Albizia hazard mitigation, as the community is trying hard to, determine how and to get rid of those Albizia trees and prevent them from spreading. The civil defense scratch match that I mentioned, we were able to restore the additional $500,000 to nonprofit grants to have it be the same as the current year. And then we also increased vacation pay by $255,000 because we realized that we have many police and firefighters who are at that retirement age. I believe that at the police department especially, they've had a lot of retirements. They have one of their largest recruit classes that's actually qualifying for retirement now. So we know even during the current fiscal year, there was a strain on that account, so we increased that as well. So that's where we were at on May 4th. Beginning on May 3rd, our lava event started, and I'm going to ask Lisa to come up to kind of talk about the next slide as well. But this particular slide has Leilani Estates and Laopuna Gardens in it. And then the next slide has a bigger area that Lisa's going to explain basically what we believe the impact on real property taxes will be in the coming year.
Good morning, Lisa Mira, Real Property Tax Administrator. From the meeting yesterday, you guys wanted a little bit more detailed information, and our best estimate about what would happen to real property taxes. And I realize all of council was here yesterday, but for those watching it on TV or from their offices, and for the other directors here, we really are doing all we can to estimate it, but it's a very fluid situation. It continues to change and surprise us every single day. And it is not an easy thing for people who usually work on past values to come up with what's going to happen in the future. With that said, you did want a figure of about how much this was going to cost us within a range. And even though we gave a range yesterday, and that was printed in the paper, you wanted us to kind of get a little bit more exact. And so if we look at the impacted area, which if you can see in Zone A, has the orange area, which is a pretty good indicator of where the flow is right now, and the damage that it's already done. We are already at a loss for 2017 just from having to prorate taxes of approximately $30,000, and that's still growing. For 2018, just for that little orange area, it's closer to $200,000. And if you consider the larger area of Leilani and Laopuna Gardens, and just that little area around there, that was the larger number of $1.2 million we gave you yesterday. Now, what you have to remember is the only thing that we currently have in the county code to allow us to adjust the 17 tax rates, or excuse me, the 2017 prorated tax amount, and as well as 2018, is the areas affected by the orange areas on the map. Everything else would need to be adjusted by way of proclamation. So what we're telling you right now is the areas that we're estimating. I don't have a proclamation yet. Yeah. Okay, they signed it this morning. That gives us the authority, so I need that in order for us to adjust, because there's nothing in the county code that said I can go back in and adjust 2018 tax values. With that said, the anticipated area in Zone A would most likely all go to a zero value or zero tax amount. Now, there are people that do live on the Malka side of Leilani, and they do feel like their property is still of value to them, but what we have to look at is what the open market, an informed buyer, is willing to purchase your property for. And right now there's a lot of concern, even if you're slightly informed, about purchasing a property in the area. If the lava happens to stop tomorrow, which could happen, if we're really lucky, it could stop tomorrow. It doesn't mean your value comes back right away. There's typically a 2-year turnaround you see on that. In this area, we expect it to be a lot longer. And we can always adjust for 2019, which is on January 1st, 2019. If I had to make a best estimate, I would say that the property has significantly lost value. As I stated yesterday, one of the newspapers said plummet. That wasn't quite the word that we used. However, the values in the area have gone down. Now, for the area in Zone B, as of last week, we did take a look at it. Because of the lots of cancellations, because of a lot of cancellations in the area, which has a high vacation rental area, their values have dropped significantly, and that's what a lot of people are investing in some of the property along the coastline therefore. So our estimate for the taxes that we are potentially losing in 2018 takes a higher percentage in Zone B, and it also takes consideration for the area in Zone C, because they are greatly affected by the SO2, and now they are limited on their access routes because that one highway has been covered with lava. Now the last area is Zone D, which technically hasn't been necessarily directly affected. I don't know of too many that was as a result of evacuation. However, when you speak to the residents there, this is an area that we do know they're feeling the earthquakes. They can hear the noise. They can see the lava. When the wind shifts, they do have effects from the SO2. And on top of that, their agricultural area has definitely been affected. And so the total area, if we had to give you the range today that you're going to lose, is approximately $3 million for 2018 in tax revenue lost. Fiscal year 19, tax year 18, sorry.
Chair?
Yes,
I heard that number, but do you have like square miles or acreage that these zones A, B, C, and D cover?
We don't necessarily we go off parcel counts, so I can tell you what our total parcel counts is. And we can definitely get you the square miles for all of the zones. I mean, the zones are really rough. They're based on how we do our neighborhoods and how the values are affected in relationship to each other.
Yeah, and if you don't have it now, that's fine, but I think for talking points, you know, and we hear a lot of concern from the visitor industry, which Mr. Okabe spoke about. You know, if we could quantify this affects 10 square miles of 4,000 square miles of our islands, so we can message better in our tourism piece, I think that would be very helpful.
Well, I can go over the numbers I have, and hopefully the staff at Real Property are listening, and they will be texting me that acreage real soon. That was a major hint in case they missed it.
So Real Property, if you're listening.
Yeah, get me the acreage. But the total number of parcels is 12,247 parcels. And when you're looking at the total number of homeowners in that area, so the number of people claiming a homeowner exemption is 1,583. Just to put it in some perspective, we have number of parcels that have ag use, so these are the ones that have applied for ag use with us, because that's come up before, and that number is 429. We have a lot of statistics, but I realize those can be boring and may not be what you're interested in.
Chair, Mayor, Councilmember O'Hara.
I really appreciate the work you're doing, Lisa, here, and but this is only one of the areas currently affected by volcanic.
No, we don't, because the area we're focused on right now is the immediate impact and not necessarily from ash. We can look at it a couple of different ways. I mean, the whole island is impacted. If I adjust the values on the whole island, you're just going to have to really increase all the tax rates. It doesn't really help the immediate area. Now, should the volcano explode, and I realize there's earthquakes affecting a lot of volcano, and I'm not downplaying that at all. It's just this area, because Airbnb and there's other factors with insurance that have been easier to quantify and justify going in and doing a proclamation for, we can point to other areas to do that. Otherwise, I mean, there's honestly people in West Hawaii that feel like they're being greatly affected. And if we start adjusting that, the tax rates are they're just going to increase. So then there's no benefit really at the end of the day to the people in this immediate area. We will keep watching the market. I mean, I'm not saying we won't go there, but for purposes of today, we are focused on this area only.
Okay, thank you. You're going to continue with the presentation? Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And just as a reminder, we are committed to the farmers, that are impacted by ash and other things that, they will not be rolled back as a violation of the egg program because of the ash or volcanic activity. So in just the last few weeks, since May 3rd, the overtime for the first pay period of this month added up to $745,000. That includes all of our departments, especially police, fire, and public works, parks and recreation, and then the other departments were smaller. We have incurred $560,000 in road repairs, and we've paid $65,000 for security, shelter meals, and other things, as well as other supplies and meals for people working was about $9,900. When we prepared this slide, we did not yet have the helicopter cost of flying, either to do routine searches or to actually help evacuate people as we did on that one day, which is another $20-some thousand. So we're already at costs of $1.4 million. The road repairs are unknown if those would be ongoing costs. It depends, how the lava covers other roads, if we'll continue to, maintain those or have to actually build even additional roads for to allow people access out of the area. So, as Lisa said, we expect the impact on revenues to be roughly $3 million for the coming year. If all the areas that were shaded lost complete value, then it would go up to $6 million. So our range is kind of 3 to 6, but we do believe that $3 million is the more realistic number in that area. Based on my calculations, if we had to incur overtime of this amount every pay period for 1 year, and even if FEMA reimbursed us 75% of that, our cost of the 25% share would still be a little over $4 million when you take into account security and other things, ongoing costs that we would have to pay. So 1 year would be roughly $4 million. So we're looking at an impact of $7 million to our budget, $3 million reduction in revenue, and roughly $4 million in cost. And the $4 million is probably on the low end, but of course we also don't know that it would last a full year. In 1955, I believe the eruption lasted 89 days. We don't know how to estimate that. This one is very active indeed. Plus we also have the ash at the same time. In the current fiscal year, we're kind of at the end of the fiscal year. We're asking departments to try and, absorb as much of the cost as they can for what they're not able to absorb. We do have that disaster account in the general fund. We have a disaster account in the highway fund, and then we have the disaster fund itself. So for the current fiscal year, we can cover costs. For those of you that may or may not be familiar with FEMA, it's definitely a reimbursement basis. It does require a 25% match. Not all costs will be allowable, but hopefully many of them will. We have already gone through some training and will be going through additional training on their procurement requirements, which are new and very stringent. But the biggest one is the delay in receiving reimbursement. So just to put it into perspective, some of you may remember the 2006 earthquake, the 6.2 that hit off Kona side. We have not been reimbursed for everything from that disaster yet. They're still in the process of closing it out. In addition, 2014, we had both the cell and the 2014 lava event. We have been reimbursed for half. That's their system. It flows through the state, and then we get reimbursed half kind of upfront or early on, and the other half is when they close out the project or the grant. And state is fairly short-staffed, and I have no idea. It could be several years before we get the remainder of that money. There's at least $700,000 that's owed us in that disaster fund that we carry that receivable on, but there are other amounts recorded as a receivable in the highway fund and capital project fund, I believe. So it's a long, drawn-out process. We looked at a variety of options. We may decide to do any one of these together as a group, or to do a little bit from all of them. So we would need to cut at least $3 million just for our revenue shortfall, and probably at least $4 million for the additional expenditures. So that would be like $7 million that we're looking for, basically. And excuse me. We had started to look at it when this first happened, and Leilani Estates and Laopuna Gardens were the area most impacted. We knew it was roughly 1.2 in revenue, so we had started to look for that amount. It would mean reversing what we put in the May budget of $500,000 for the nonprofit grants, reducing miscellaneous claims and judgments by $100,000, although I'm still not sure that's a wise idea. Taking away the council contingency funds that we just put back in, reducing R&D, ag, tourism, business development, eliminating the hazard mitigation project, and a lot of other little things that Nancy and our team were able to come up with. But that would give us only the $1.2 million. There's not a lot more to reduce. We could unfund funded positions, but as you know, every county employee is pretty much impacted by this disaster. Whether it's police manning roadblocks, we have National Guard help, we have highways people out there. We have a lot of people out there, and I don't think this is the time to unfund positions or to do a RIF, which would be a reduction in force. For those of you that may not be familiar with the reduction in force process, it requires 90-day advance notice, and you can pick the position that you plan on laying off, but they have the opportunity to apply for other positions within the county that they qualify for, and they would bump someone, and then that person that gets bumped has an opportunity to apply for other positions until you get all the way down to the lowest level person. So even though you thought that maybe you were going to lay off someone who's making $100,000 a year, by the time the process is all done, you may end up only laying off a clerk that makes $25,000 to $30,000 a year. In addition, that process usually takes up to a year because of all the bumping, and the person that you bumped gets red circled and they keep their pay. It's not a fun process, and the state went through it, and I think in the end they didn't really save anything. So it's definitely not something on our list of recommendations. It's more just to make everybody aware of what the process would be and the little, if anything, it would save us. There is a section, I got asked about it yesterday, section 10-8, I believe it is, in the charter. It does allow for, 10-8, supplemental and emergency appropriations. So I've seen this section before, and I've read it before, but I guess I never read all the way to the very bottom of the paragraph, that very last sentence that said, the total of emergency appropriations in any fiscal year shall not exceed 1/2 of 1% of the total operating appropriations, excluding those for debt service. And so when you take our $518 million upcoming budget, less debt service, and you take 0.5% of that, that's only $2.3 million. And you have to have funding or revenue source. The budget still has to remain balanced. However, this section does allow us to borrow. Instead of borrowing from a bank, we would probably prefer to borrow from maybe one of our funds that had additional funding. It would take council action. So let's say Ponk has probably the most money in it right now of our funds. But also, the way the section's worded, we would have to repay that no later than July 1st, 2019, the beginning of the next fiscal year. And we would have to obviously take the action after July 1st of this current year. So why that's helpful, especially if this disaster continues on and we don't estimate correctly how much we need to save, it may be helpful to us next year. It really just buys us a little bit of time, not a lot. As I said yesterday, everything's on the table. It's to give everybody just an opportunity to see what the impact would be. We ran numbers on if we were to adjust real property taxes, and we did a $3, $6, and $9 million impact. The $3 million would cover just the shortfall in revenue that we're losing from the Puna area. The $6 million would provide $3 million additional to help support the disaster costs, and $9 was kind of a combination of if all $6 million in Puna was lost plus additional expenses. That would be important as well. So if we had a $3 million revenue shortfall that we wanted to cover with increases in real property taxes, residential would go from 1110 to 1130, apartment from 1170 to 1190, and all the way down. We did impact every single classification evenly across the board because we are one island and one community, and we felt that we should all pitch in to help everybody out together. Same thing for the $6 million scenario that you have before you. The rates would go from $11.10 to $11.45, $11.70 to $12 for apartment, commercial $10.70 to $11. And again, the numbers at the top are the total revenue that would generate, both to help us make up for the shortfall in revenue that we're expecting from the loss of real property taxes in Puna, as well as to help cover costs. And the last one would be $9 million to generate, which means residential would go from a current rate of $11.10, and it would go up to $11.55. Apartments from $11.70 would go to $12.10, commercial from $10.70 up to $11.15. So these are to give you some options, just to look at. The next one is to look at and possibly get a reconsideration of the GE surcharge. It would generate $25 million in fiscal year 19. Based on the final act signed by the governor, it would all have to go to transportation. That doesn't mean we couldn't lobby the legislature to make it more usable for disaster-related monies as well. But some of our costs are definitely going to be road-related. Obviously, some of the roads covered by lava are county, some are state, and many are private. So one of the things we could also lobby the legislature for was to help with disaster-related private roads or something like that. This is all just coming about in the last few weeks, so it's not like we have all the answers of what exactly we would lobby for, but trying to think of all of those possibilities. It would free up $4.6 million in the general fund. That's the mass transit portion that's not covered by grants. So that money could be moved over to that GE tax would cover that, and that would free up $4.6 million either to help cover revenue shortfalls or to cover the disaster-related expenses. And we do believe that the GE surcharge could pay for a portion of our FEMA match, anything related to what we currently spend in the highway fund, whether it's the emergency road work, their labor, but at least that portion we do believe would be able to cover it for that. Anything over and above what we need for that, as we've said before, the mayor's committed to having the GE surcharge, at least in the first year, go to help implement the mass transit master plan. As well as to do those other larger road projects that would not be covered by fuel tax. If we have to wait to borrow money or get federal assistance for some of those larger road projects, they could take a long time to come. One of the things that, I continue to be concerned about is our bond ratings. We've already received telephone calls from our bond rating agencies. Obviously, they're concerned about lava. Of course, we've tried to put in perspective for them that, the portion of the island that's where the eruption is occurring versus the rest of the island. However, the impact on tourism is definitely going to impact our bond ratings at some point. one of the things the bond readers look at is our reserves, basically, what our fund balance is, what our budget stabilization fund is, what our disaster fund is. And yes, we have prepared for the future, and yes, we have a budget stabilization fund, and yes, we have a disaster fund, but we cannot deplete those down to zero. As you know, our island is one of the most disaster-prone islands. We have had more FEMA events than any other county. I remember the 2000 floods, the 2006 earthquake, the 2011 tsunami, the 2014 hurricane, the 2014 lava, and now the 2018 lava event. And those are just in my career with the county. You know, many others. There's also been several FEMA fire events and whatnot as well. So we need to be prepared for the future as well. We can't eliminate all of our reserves in 1 year. That's not going to put us in a good place financially. Not to mention hurricane season starts on June 1st of this year. I'm just trying to be realistic, sorry. Our budget stabilization fund and the county code does set a target amount of 5 to 15% of general fund total expenditures. We are at 5% right now, so we do want to be cautious. Our fund balance probably will take a little bit of hit because of the expenditures we're incurring in overtime and whatnot right now. So we're not expecting that, to go up in any way. That's all we had in this part of the presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you have. I spent a lot of time, as well as our staff yesterday, with Corporation Counsel, looking at a lot of alternatives and what might be helpful, many of which I mentioned in here. But if you have questions, we're more than happy to help answer them.
Okay. Councilmember O'Hara?
You mentioned, Deanna, the emergency funding that we could pursue. It was 2.3 million or something.
If we were to do an emergency appropriation, it would be 2.3 million. We currently have 6 million in the disaster fund. Of course, 700,000 or a little more of that is a receivable from FEMA, so there's really about 5.3 million in cash there. Okay. As of the beginning of this month.
I'm wondering what it's going to take to potentially repurpose the geothermal funds. Maybe Mr. Yee needs to be involved in this discussion because some of these impacts, I have to say, in terms of people reluctant to move back and decline in property tax revenues, is related to what that situation has contributed to the natural disaster.
So we do have 2 geothermal funds, and I'm happy if Mr. Yee would like to come forward. The first one is the Community Benefit and Relocation Fund. Mm-hmm. And so that one is where we would buy out people's property that live in the geothermal zone. We have bought out several parcels already. It's based kind of on the assessed value, so I'm not sure how that would work going forward.
Well, my concern here is up until... Well, this initiated as a volcanic event, which wouldn't have triggered any usage of the geothermal funds, but it has since evolved into a complicated mess. And we are sitting on, I believe, Deanna, you can verify, about a total of close to 7 million of unexpended funds. I know there's a 1 million cap on the relocation, and it's questionable if this will ever resume activity in that location. Very questionable. So
I have about 4 million in the Geothermal Relocation and Community Benefit Fund and about 2 million in the Geothermal Asset Fund. Okay. But those were very quick calculations I did last night.
Yeah, and I've done some previously too. It's actually a little more than 4 in the relocation, but we have rules in place as to how we can potentially use that, and so it's going to take action if we want to repurpose that. But I just wanted to bring that into play. What do you think, Mr. Yee?
Michael Yee, Planning Director. I think, like you said, there are things in place right now that would probably prevent us from just outright using the funds for a volcanic event. However, I think as we've tried to consider how we can rewrite some of the criteria for using those funds, I think obviously if folks want to bring that forth, we should certainly consider that.
when we looked with Corporation Council last night, the community benefit portion of the fund, I believe civil defense is one of the allowed purposes of that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
As is land acquisition, and we may need to be replacing farmers. I'm already in discussion with the state on this because we do have a lot of large tracts of state ag land, and we had a meeting last night with the Department of Ag Deputy Director and USDA, and it wasn't well publicized, so we didn't have that many farmers, but right now they're not even aware, they're not been told yet whether they've lost the land that they are using, and if it's just loss of crop or if it's actual loss of land. So we're still in the dark on a lot of that.
Are you done?
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Leloy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Diana, for all these different options and scenarios. My first question is to option 1, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Is this a comprehensive option, or do we can cherry pick something out of one,
Yeah, it's meant
borrow
to
from
be.
two?
These are all options that we can implement even all together, some of each one. We were not able to come up with $7 million in expense reductions. Too many of our expenditures are mandated by state law. Nor do we think it would be the wisest thing to do given the situation we're in. In addition, borrowing from PONC is probably not something we would do right now as we develop the budget. It would probably be something we would save for next fiscal year when we're in the budget and maybe we didn't budget enough. Maybe the disaster got, heaven forbid, bigger or cost us more than we anticipated. And then doing the real property tax rates, we only get one opportunity each year to set those. So same thing, maybe, why we realize probably $3 million is what we probably are going to take a hit on. There's also additional costs, but that may not be the only way people want to fix it. And then GE tax, so it could be a smorgasbord of things, yes.
So let's talk about that smorgasbord a little bit, because clearly there's some timing elements related to those options, right? So what I just heard you say is if we consider some of these options, for example, the real property tax increase, not that anybody's interested in any of that right now, that's going to sunset rather quickly here.
Correct.
So that option will quickly get taken off the table.
Right, rates have to be set no later than June 20th.
Okay, so June 20th. And then,
for the GE tax to work, we would have to implement that by June 30th. For that to be effective for the coming fiscal year, anything after June 30th, it would not be effective till fiscal year 20.
So from a timing perspective, the real property tax and the GE has the closest sunset or deadlines that we would have to, if we use those options.
Right.
And then after that, it would be the borrow from the PUNC fund or reduce
expenditures.
expenditures.
Trying to balance everything, the needs of Puna, our financial situation, our bond ratings. I think we want to take some action to generate additional revenue or reduce expenditures now as we adopt the budget and save like the borrowing from PONC and those things if the emergency gets larger in the future. And I just, why people are thinking about things. The total acreage, and I believe this is all 4 shaded areas, is 55,000 acres, or 2.1% of our island that's being impacted by the lava right now. And we thank our real property tax for staff for catching the hint and getting those to us so quickly.
I'm going to yield at this time. Thank you.
Councilmember, you had your light out earlier. Did you want to?
Well, I think Deanna just pretty much answered my question because I was wondering priority-wise, whether it's better for us to look. I didn't realize that we could borrow from other funds.
Right, and that's it's one of those cases in the charter that I believe is set up so that if something does happen, we have an opportunity. I don't believe it's meant to be, our first option, but definitely, if things happen. I mean, a lot of our the disaster fund, the budget stabilization fund, this emergency appropriations, they're all set up in cases of true emergency if something were to happen during the fiscal year. In some ways, we're fortunate that we have the opportunity to mend the budget that's coming up, to try to take, that into account. But none of these are easy decisions, as I said yesterday.
I think my other question was regarding the emergency or our disaster fund, and so you didn't want to borrow from that to the point of it.
We will be using.
But
right, we will be using some of that this year, as I mentioned yesterday, and I guess probably not everybody was tuning in, but, we have not written any of the project worksheets with FEMA yet. They've been on site, they've been very helpful, we've gotten them to approve projects before we started them, but we haven't actually written out what they call the project worksheets, where they actually obligate the funds to us. And so probably at the end of the month, we'll start that process. We have somebody coming out tomorrow that I hope to get more information on that. So right now we have to fund basically all the costs related to that. So the 1.4 million in costs that we've incurred to date, some will be coming from highway fund, but the 700 and some thousand that we've already spent from general fund, we may not have adequate appropriations to cover that, so we will have to use part of the disaster fund even in the current fiscal year just to cover those costs.
And when we do receive the reimbursements for the previous events that you mentioned, the earthquake and tsunami and Isel, etc., do those go straight into the same disaster fund?
Yes, the receivable is set up in the fund in which the expenditures were incurred. So if we spend the money out of disaster fund, then yes, it goes back into that fund.
Are we expecting any other reimbursements to come in there, the ones that are still due?
I'm expecting all of them to come in. I highly doubt if it will be this fiscal year. They are that far behind.
And there's not a way to get that information?
If the state could get more staff, then they probably could look at our information more quickly. They've had
Seems like that would help us a lot.
They've had an unfortunate series of events, including some of their personnel passing away. So every time somebody starts on it and gets down the road of reviewing our expenditures, something happens and we have to have a new person start looking at it again. So it has been a very long, drawn-out process.
Yeah, seems obvious that would be the first place to be able to
but the balance that I gave you of the $6 million includes those receivables from FEMA. So we've already taken that into account.
Thank you.
Councilmember Richards?
Thank you, Chair. And Deanna, thank you for promising a interesting conversation today, and you guys did deliver. Also, thank you to Real Property for taking the hint for the information. What we're talking about, and I think your fiscal thought process is real sound as far as not wanting to touch any of those funds, because we're talking about cash flow management and the liquidity of the county, and so leaving that available to us if we get real stuck is probably the best way. The projects that you're talking about for FEMA, and conceptually, yeah, go ahead, we haven't done the paperwork yet. What kind of cash liability are we looking at there for the short term, say the next 90 days? And again, off the top of your head, I realize.
No, so based that, we spent $745,000 just in overtime, and if I add in the security and other recurring costs, if we say it's about $800,000 for one pay period, that would be $1.6 million per month. So for 90 days, that would be 1.6 million times 3, or roughly 4.8 million. Of which I would expect to get 75% back.
Yeah, at some point,
yes.
Which comes back to the trying to figure out how to manage the cash flow going forward.
So, in terms of liquidity, I have already talked to our treasurer, and he's keeping everything short term. Normally, this coming July, when the first installments of real property tax would come in, we would invest some of that a little bit longer term, 3-4 months out. But we're going to keep everything liquid because we're unsure of the timing of some of the reimbursements. In addition, we've been very thankful that, both our federal legislators and our state legislators have been out here to look to see how they might be able to help. But none of that is for sure yet. I am aware Kauai received some assistance after their flood from the state, but I really don't know in what terms that is. We're appreciative of the state providing, their National Guard and other helpers as well.
And you could actually see the end of that flood coming, this one.
Yeah, this is the most unique disaster I've been involved with since I've been at the county. When we had the 2000 flood, the rain came, it ended, we fixed things. Same thing with the earthquake. It came, it ended, we fixed things. All the disasters have been like that. The 2014 lava was a little bit different. It started more upslope. It crawled down the hill. It did take a structure. It was very scary for the people of Pahoa. We didn't know where it was going. But it was a much more slower moving lava. This, I cannot even imagine what some of those residents in that area are going through with not knowing where the next fissure will appear, not knowing where the lava is going to flow. This is very scary for anybody down there, and we don't know when it's going to stop. And this is the first time since the last ash eruption was 1924, I believe, to have both of them occurring at the same time. As Dr. Jem says, we're in unprecedented times. We've never had an eruption like this before, so we don't have a lot of information to go on. We're hopeful it is like 1955 and it's only 89 days, but time will tell, and we really have no way of knowing.
Okay, so we have a 518 budget in front of us with the projected reduction in income stream, projected increases in expenditures. Our target is somewhere around 7 million.
I would be most comfortable if we somehow generated 7 million. Part of that 7 million would, 3 million of it would go to replace the expected reduction in real property taxes. So basically, I'm saying we over budgeted, our revenue for real property taxes by 3 million, and we need to reduce it. And then part of it I would suggest go directly to the disaster fund so that we can cover the expenses related to the lava, no matter which fund they're actually incurred in. Let's say we budget 7 million for next fiscal year, and let's say this we'd raise. I'm just gonna pick one, but let's say we do it by raising real property taxes. If the event ended maybe midway through the year, and so the expense portion, let's say we didn't use all of it, it would go to fund balance, which would then be able to be utilized in the future year to potentially reduce the rates if needed. The other thing is, we're at the beginning of this disaster. We don't know yet what the impact on tourism will be. I don't know yet what the impact on the values will be for fiscal year 2019. Many of the hotels, would prefer we use the income-based approach on setting their values, and if they're empty, that's going to have a significant effect as well.
To clarify, 7 million, and that's a combination of either increasing revenue or decreasing expenses. It could be a
somehow
combination
finding
of the two.
$7 million. Yes.
Okay. All right. At this point, I yield.
Councilmember Ruggles.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Diana. I can tell this is a lot of work, just in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the awesome staff I have, yes.
So, currently, let's see, I just have so many questions. The Community Benefit Fund, what is the balance for that?
It's roughly $4 million, just a count.
Okay, and as far as the disaster fund, you said that there was 5.3 million in it currently?
Of cash, yes. Of spendable cash.
Okay. Spendable, and what is the total?
The fund has $6 million in it, but 700,000-ish is a receivable from FEMA.
Okay, I see. Thank you. Have we yet used any funds from this disaster fund for this event?
We did back in 2014 for Estelle and the 2014 lava, most of which was reimbursed by FEMA.
Okay, great. Do you know how much we used?
No, I don't have that with me, but we can calculate that.
Okay, and what do you feel would be the max that we could use from this disaster fund?
You know, the whole idea when the disaster fund was first set up was to have that safety net. What happened in 2000 is we didn't have a disaster fund, so we had the flooding, we had a lot of infrastructure repairs that needed to be made, and so we didn't have a source of funds to really fix those. We were fortunate that year that I believe we had excess fund balance that they were able to appropriate, but other than that, they would have had to probably borrow and do bond money. We cannot use bond money for operating costs, and a lot of our costs for this disaster are actually overtime and operating costs. So we want to have at least, several million to carry forward for the next time, because we do have to front the money. Even though we get FEMA assistance, we always have to front that money till they reimburse us. And so by having the $5 to $6 million in there at all times, I think the goal in the county code is to have it reach 10 million. But by keeping that 5 or 6 million, that means we'll have the cash to kind of front for the next disaster.
Right, I'm wondering how much, if at all, would you feel comfortable taking from this fund?
What we are taking right now is, whatever it's going to take us to get through the end of the fiscal year, because, the 250 disaster account in the general fund is not going very far for this disaster. So we'll probably be using part of it, but then, like I said, we do hope to be reimbursed by FEMA.
Okay, and in option 1, it's one of the expenses that was proposed to cut was reduce R&D, ag, tourism, promotion, and business development. Do you know what that number would be?
I think I'm hoping Nancy Kelly's bringing up her sheet. I left that on my desk, but it was like 10,000 here and 20,000 there. One of the things we're realizing is that we can't really cut tourism, we can't really cut egg promotion. Our farmers and our businesses need that money more now than ever. We definitely got to do something to kick in gear our economy for this coming year. We already have people thinking that the whole island is impacted, and not to mention the whole state. So now that we know it really is only 2.1% of our island, it does help to tell that story. Yeah, it was 45,000 in total across all of those areas. And again, we started working on that a little while ago when we thought we just had to find 1.2 million. And before we started realizing, the true impact it's having on egg and the true impact it's having on our tourism.
That's all the questions I have. I think that we have a good variety of options here that we can start exploring. I'll yield at this time. Thank you.
Councilmember Chung?
Hi, Deanna. You did touch upon this subject, and my question may have been asked and answered, but we're all reeling, so
we are. Yes,
so I apologize if it was. But I want to ask a question about this emergency ordinance in section 3-11. You talked about it, as well as it relates to section 10-8, appropriations and supplemental emergency. What would be the purposes of an emergency ordinance? Is it only to appropriate monies under an emergency, or are there other applications for this? And to borrow?
There probably are other applications, especially if, life, health, and safety are impacted. However, they're not to be used to levy taxes, which is why we have only that one opportunity to set the real property tax rates by June 20th. They may not be used to authorize borrowing or grant and renew on these particular emergency ordinances. So the emergency appropriations are the ones under 10-8. Joe may have other ideas, but I think, emergency ordinances have been utilized before but in terms of money itself, it's limited to that 2.3 million based on our current numbers
Right.
in our
I mean,
budget.
because it's kind of a strangely worded charter provision, this emergency
Yes,
ordinances. It tells us what we can't do, and it refers us to a different section relating to appropriations.
Right.
But I'm just wondering if there's anything else out there, and probably not, right? Because it's
No,
not explicit.
Right, right. There's not a whole lot of other options. We've been, really thinking about it since May 3rd and trying to go through and determine, what all of our options are. If this is a short event, then yeah, we might be okay, but, there's no signs of it stopping is the problem right now.
Then I have a question of our county clerk. The deadline for submission of charter amendment proposals was in early May. But what if we utilize this emergency ordinance provision to fast track charter amendments? Because it's only one reading. Would that be possible?
I'm not really sure if that would be possible or not. So the emergency ordinance would only require one reading as opposed to the three readings.
Right.
If we could do that, certainly we could get it in time because we would have enough time still.
Or then my other question would be to the chair, because we need three readings. But given the exigent circumstances that we're faced with, and I'm sure many of us have ideas of what we could do within the context of the charter. I'm just wondering, okay, we need three readings. We're already behind if we go on a regularly scheduled rota. But would it be possible now for us to have a special meeting?
And can I call up our corp counsel, Joe? Because I don't mind doing the extra meetings. I just need to know if we're going to be okay with that.
Okay, that's a good question. And actually, a similar question came out previously on something else, and my answer to that can be no. When you look at that charter, it's basically it's a form of the government, and so
What question are you answering, first of all?
it's fast tracking the charter amendment.
Through the emergency?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind that.
Oh, okay.
Let's just go with the three readings. Let's try to be real safe about this.
Okay. So that's a different question. Okay.
So, yeah,
Okay,
so
can we look at maybe the dates?
yeah, so
we have?
we have to have three readings,
Right.
right? I mean, this is actually the chair's question, but we have to have three readings. But does it have to be on regularly scheduled meeting dates, or can we go first Wednesday of June, second Wednesday of June, and
I guess we use
third, second, third, and fourth special meeting? Can it be done? Can the three readings be done with a special meeting, as long as notice is given, proper notice and everything?
Exactly.
No problem.
Yeah, as long as proper notice has been given, you can always do a special meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the
Yeah.
question.
Never mind about the fast tracking part.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. That's all. Go ahead.
Can I just add one thing? As a reminder also, when it comes to revenues and just as you're considering all the options, as a reminder, the state legislature did vote to put on the ballot this year the borough property tax surcharge for investment property to be used for education. And we are not sure yet the impact that's going to have on us in the future. As you know, we try to tax those same properties. So, which is one of the reasons we would like to, at some point at least, make our revenue stream more diversified.
Okay. I just gotta ask Councilmember Chung to step in that. Okay, so Councilmember Leloy.
Thank you, Chair. Since we're kind of looking at a smorgasbord and possible charter amendments, I'm looking at Section 10-12 Special Fund. Upon recommendation of the mayor, the council may by ordinance abolish or establish special funds that may be necessary for the proper and efficient segregation of fiscal operations of the county. So when I look at our budget, we have the beautification fund, we have the bikeway fund. Are these other funds that we could maybe shift to help with some of the shortfalls, but would still require some? And I'm not looking to abolish them, but maybe
right,
suspend
just to suspend them. Joe probably could speak to it better. Some of those funds are actually established by HRS, and so our the governor's proclamation may impact those, but probably not the mayor's proclamation.
Yeah, Mr. Kamalama, I mean, if we're gonna look at all options, and I appreciate everything Deanna put together and her team, and they're all really smart, but I mean, we might as well try everything and see what we can get. I mean, what I'm hearing is we're looking at $7 million and possibly growing, and we might need more than just an amendment to borrow from the punk fund or reduce expenses.
And then just to put it into perspective, Bikeway Fund has $650,000, and Beautification Fund has about the same amount.
So a 1.2, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So this is Joseph Camello. Anyway, so I do agree with the statement made by the finance director. So we have to look at the state laws.
Yeah, could you follow up and provide that feedback to us? Because if we're gonna try and do some amendments or work within the confines of our charter, but use some emergency relief provisions, I want to be able to use everything we can. And again, I appreciate what the finance department is exploring, but I think we can explore a little more.
Okay,
That's my point. I yield.
Okay. Councilmember Richards, you had your light on, then I'll go to Councilmember Eoff.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. Again, I don't know if you even have this information available to you at the moment, but we talked about the $7 million number, and have you looked at budget reductions as far as where we can cut expenses? First question.
We did. In option one, that total that we came up with was $1.2 million.
Okay. Comment on some of the cuts. Given where we are with our tourism, this is just editorialized. I don't think cutting the tourism promotion budget is a good idea.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So if we took out that, we'd be at roughly $1 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just looking back, I'm constantly looking back at our history. I know Kalapana went through an event back in the 80s, early 90s, if I recall right, and I was trying to look it up. How did the county, what time of year did that start, and how did the county manage that? And what I'm looking for is relative numbers that they dealt with as far as finances, and then maybe there's some things that we don't need to reinvent that were already tackled at that point.
We can go back and check, but one of the things about that event was it covered a period of almost 20 years, I think. When it first started, it took out some homes, and then I think it was staggered over numerous years. So I believe the disaster section of the real property tax code has been in there for a long time, helping individual owners. But this kind of impact in terms of having the eruption along the rift zone and being in a neighborhood, I don't think it's like that. I think all the other flows have come down towards the,
Yeah, no, I get that point. Leilani is, I think all of these things have their own unique aspects of it. I'm trying to see if there's just portions of it.
No, I agree, and we're all about not recreating the wheel, but we did contact one of our former property tax administrators who's been here since 1980, when real property tax came over from the state, and even he doesn't remember it having such a large impact. I think it was just a few properties at a time.
If I could ask, could we get a history of the real property tax annually for the last, maybe since back to 1980? If we could look at that, then maybe correlate it to the anything that was going on at the time. And again, just, I don't know if that gives us any answers, but it's more information. I yield.
Thank you. Councilmember Yoff. Oh wait, hang on 1 second. Councilmember David never had a chance to speak even in the first round, so I'm going to allow Councilmember David if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Sako, I just had, earlier you said that given our situation, between 3 and 7 million would be the number we're looking for, about anywhere from 3, okay.
Yes, 3 to 7.
Yeah. So,
And again, 3 million is what we do expect real property tax loss revenue, and 4 million would be to cover a year's worth of overtime and
for the
costs.
overtime. And
Just
so,
our 25%.
right. And given the discussion we've been having about potentially reducing borrowing from PONC, if what you're saying, the 1.2 reduction in your reduced expenses, the amounts that was put back into our contingencies on your PowerPoint that you said total 1.2, then we're talking about possibly the bikeway and beautification fund around 1.3, and then maybe emergency borrowing from PONC maximum is 1.2 million.
2.3 million.
2.3.
But we would have to wait to do that till next fiscal year, because and
That
that
would-
would have to be repaid back. And I
Right.
think even using some of these special funds, they may also have to be repaid back. We would have to look at that more carefully, and I believe that's what Mr. Kamalama is looking at now.
Right, and if he could also, even though there's a repayment, because maybe could we extend that repayment timeline if we have to, given that this is an emergency situation down the road?
Why I fully understand what you're saying, and I agree. One of the things I've been told is because that's in the charter that does not get overridden with the disaster proclamation. Things in the county code can, but not the charter requirements.
And that's where maybe a charter amendment would come in.
Right.
Okay, and then so if we eliminate that, and then the potential for the tourism, that makes it 1, 2, 3, 3.5 without the PONC. But we're still looking for the total, the best scenario. Okay. All right. I just wanted to keep thinking.
And my feeling was that we probably need to adjust the budget by the 7 million now, and then the 2.3 million that we'd be allowed to do under the disaster or emergency section would actually have to be utilized next year in case the costs even go higher. I mean, I think that's the unfortunate thing about this event. We're not sure what's going to happen yet. So, but we're definitely appreciative of the things we do have in place, like the fuel tax and whatnot, that we can utilize that for roads and the emergency and clearing out Government Beach Road and allowing people to evacuate when necessary.
I see. Okay, for now, I yield for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Yoff.
Thank you. Yeah, my thinking was kind of along the same lines as Ms. Leloy and Ms. David, because there's so many moving parts, but there's some things that we can be assured of, like where we are allowed by disaster mechanisms to borrow, or even to so the timing is also something that you're phasing in the need. So as even if we were to consider a charter amendment, even that would put the ability to access that extra money would be way down the line too. Plus, there's an uncertainty about the voters passing the charter amendment.
And as I've read the charter many times, but yesterday with much more detail probably than in the past. And one of the things I did realize is the charter is really set up to protect the public and our voters, and that not to put them in a precarious situation. So even if we were to borrow, having to pay back by July 1st of the following fiscal year is really to protect them from digging ourselves into too big a hole that they would have to make up through like real property tax increases in the future. And so I applaud those who really have created the charter over the years, and it really was set up to protect the taxpayers. And while we want to look at all possibilities, I think Joe can help us determine
which funds would have to be paid back. Let's say he determines bikeway fund, we can utilize that now, but we would have to pay it back. Those are going to be the key factors here because, if we can utilize some of them, great. Other ones, maybe not. But making sure we do pay back as mandated by the charter. And we're not trying to put anyone in this situation. None of us could foresee this, disaster coming. Yes, we have hurricane season, but we don't have lava season. It's not. Yeah, it's all the time. You're right. I mean, it's just Kilauea has been erupting since 1983, and I still remember the article my mom sent me when I was in college. And so it's a long time event. Sometimes it's more active than others.
Oh, did you want to add something? Because I did have a different question after that.
If I can just briefly, I'm Nancy Crawford, Deputy Finance Director, and I know you're all very well aware of this, but I just thought it bears repeating that while we are looking at sort of immediate costs and immediate reductions in real property tax revenue, this is not the revenue side of it. It may end and we may be able to cover all the expenditures. But the revenue side of it is not short term. This is a long-term effect, certainly on the lower Puna area and likely on Ka'u area. And as Deanna mentioned before, given revenue losses to individual businesses and the resorts, what we're planning ahead for the next fiscal year's values and the year after that, and probably after that, I think it's hard for any of us to imagine a very quick rebound in property values here. So I just thought that I would mention that again for the benefit of everyone, that we're trying to look at something short term here, but it really is payback is going to be difficult going forward. Thank you.
Okay. And could you just, I know you've explained this before, but it's still a little bit unclear to me, is the uses of the geothermal funds, the two accounts, and is any of that money available?
Mr. Yu, I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong. So there's two funds. One is the Relocation and Community Benefit Fund, and initially it was just for relocation. And both of these were set up, I believe, with the license that for the geothermal site PGV. And so initially it was to relocate people within that area should they so choose, because we weren't sure, I guess, of the impacts possibly of having the geothermal in the area. So you could put yourself on a list and we would buy your property and then we'd sell it to get more money to buy more properties. At some point in time, probably about 10 years ago, we created the community benefit portion. And that was to be able to do road work and whatnot, because there had been some money that was accumulating in the fund. And one of the purposes that was added was the civil defense aspect as well. Hopefully I left that on top. And so the purpose, that fund can be used for relocation expenses, including, like the appraisals and all of that. But then, in addition, for road improvements, water infrastructure, land acquisition, parks and recreational facility needs, civil defense, and mass transit improvements. And it's specified for Lower Puna area, and it's defined in here. I believe the planning director is the one that approves those expenses or approves the allowable expenditure before we spend it. Then there's also the asset fund, the geothermal asset fund. And that one, I believe, was set up so should there be some kind of accident or something happen at the site, that those funds could be used to, whether it's to help evacuate the area or clean up or anything like that. So those are kind of the two different funds and kind of the main purposes. And so there's a little over $4 million in the community benefit and relocation fund, and then there's about $2 million in the asset fund, I believe.
So those aren't really available to us in this situation for any.
I think the community benefit portion of the would be, for civil defense, but I'm not sure if there are people who would try to get us to repurchase the home. I'm a little confused. I don't have the planning director's rules in front of me in terms of how we set the price, but it is based on assessed value, of which those values would be being reduced right now.
Madam Chair, can Ms. O'Hara chime in? I think she wants to.
Is it just to add to Deanna's explanation? With the geothermal asset fund, which is there to mitigate the negative impacts of geothermal, it also, the rules require that it be approved through the commission. So it's a little bit lengthier process than the relocation and community benefit fund, which is approved by the director, and the changes in budget come through us.
Thank you. Are you done? Okay, Councilmember Ruggles.
Thank you. I'm coming up with a lot of different ideas here, and I'm wondering what the process is for proposing these ideas.
In funding or
In making up for the $3 million reduction in revenue for real property
do you want to
tax.
just talk about it? And because I don't know where you're going with this yet. If you're going to be proposing amendments, or if you want to ask the director if some of your ideas would work.
Okay, great. So just off the top of my head, it looks like we have $6 million in the disaster fund with the $700,000 receivable. My initial thought was, when I asked you about the disaster fund, I'm having a hard time getting an answer as far as how much you think would be available for us to use now.
Okay, so what I think I did answer, and that we have $6 million in the fund, but only $5.3 million cash, and it was $1.6 million or so in ongoing expenditures per month. So we'd be at $4.8 million in 3 months, and I don't know when we'd get FEMA reimbursed. So I'm kind of looking at it that even just from this fiscal year, May and June expenditures that we're incurring, it could kind of wipe out the fund already. There would be little left till we got reimbursed by FEMA. But ongoing, we want to keep at least $5 to $6 million in there, because that is kind of our costs or our fund to kind of front the costs. Because every disaster is like this: we incur the money or incur the costs, and then FEMA reimburses us at a later date, and only 75% is reimbursed. So I'm kind of looking at there's not a lot in the disaster fund right now beyond this fiscal year until we get reimbursed by FEMA.
Okay, so would you say that is there any that we could use in the disaster fund for this disaster?
There's 5. Well, we are. I guess what I'm trying to say is right now in this fiscal year. So one of the things to try and clarify is we still, May and June of this year, are still in fiscal year 18, in which we only budgeted $250,000 in our general fund disaster account. We still have to pay for the cost in this fiscal year, and the disaster fund is going towards that. So now the budget before you is actual for this upcoming fiscal year, which starts on July 1. So the fiscal year 19 budget, and I don't think we're going to have anything left in the disaster fund for fiscal year 19 until at some point when we get reimbursed by FEMA.
Okay, so the $5.3 million that's in there now is going to be gone by next fiscal year.
It's very likely, but it depends on the actions that are needed, and that's the difficult part for me. And then once we get confirmation from FEMA that they'll be reimbursing us, and we'll get hopefully our first half portion of that will restore some dollars in there. But I have no idea on the timing, and what I've been trying to explain as well is FEMA keeps changing their rules, and their procurement guidelines are very stringent now, and we're having a special training tomorrow. So even though we typically expect to get 75% back, it's not guaranteed because of their new rules as well.
Okay, and so for the expenses that you just you said the overall impact of the budget: $3 million reduction in RPT revenue and $4 million increase in cost.
Right.
Does that current fund in the disaster fund help cover the $4 million increase in cost?
Well, because the $4 million was calculated as roughly $800,000 in ongoing costs per pay period. Not only employee costs, but also things like security and food and things like that. So that would be $1.6 million per month. And so when we did it last night, I looked at that $4 million is actually only our share, or the 25%. But it's a new event, and we are having new costs all the time. But if we did times 12 times 0.25, our costs, if it was really 1.6 per month, I had based it on a little bit lower number. our 25% share would be 4.8. And so when I did it last night, I was assuming the 4 million cost is just our 25% share of this disaster.
Okay.
That, we would be getting reimbursed by FEMA for the rest of it. Of course, we have no idea how long this event will continue. Not to mention, even if the lava stopped, I don't know how long it would take for the gases and other things to stop, or when the ash would stop. I mean, there's a lot of different things going on in this one. It's a much different disaster than we've had before.
Okay, so just to be clear, as far as the disaster fund applies to this $7 million deficit we're trying to make up to, those funds are not available to us.
Right. I believe we're going to go through those pretty much all this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Well, that changes everything. I think that
we're not in an easy situation, and I tried really hard to say that yesterday.
I think that utilizing the geothermal funds is a good idea, simply because after this event, it's not smart of us to continue geothermal down there. It's just nonsensical. But that's just my personal opinion. I don't have the authority to even make that decision. But I personally think that using the geothermal funds for this would be appropriate. There's also, and this one I'm talking about the community benefit fund, not the asset fund.
Just like the 4 million.
Yeah. The borrowing from PONC or the bikeway fund, I think, is also a good options. I understand now that for the time being, when I first heard the options of the general excise tax and the real property tax, I personally would like to do everything we can to not have to increase taxes. So if we can borrow or use geothermal, use PONC funds, use the bikeway fund, instead of increasing taxes, I think we should go that way.
Okay, so just, not to interrupt you, but I just want to be sure we're all on the same page, is that why I totally agree borrowing would get us through. It would only really kick the can down the road, because we have to repay them by July 1st, 2019, which would be fiscal year 20. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is by raising some kind of tax or some kind of revenue. And as we've been trying to explain, is we believe this will be a slow recovery in real property tax values as well. So just to clarify.
That's where I was going. Okay. Thank you. So with that, I think looking back on different scenarios that can help protect people who are most vulnerable to tax increases is a good option. I'll yield at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say, because this is going to be a protracted discussion, and it's going to be a work in progress, because actually, I guess you guys are giving us options. It's going to be up to us, right, to really balance the budget right now.
It is, but definitely we're willing to work with you guys, and if you need us to help prepare amendments or to help run other scenarios.
No, I'm not in any way suggesting that you guys are leaving it up.
No, but I mean, we figured today was a good chance to have discussion, because I don't know where everybody feels. I think probably somewhere is a combination of all four, maybe. Yeah. But we're in unprecedented times, and none of us have all the answers.
I'll just say right now, I'm not going to be supporting any real property tax increases. That's out of the question. And I'm not going to be supporting borrowing money from any funds, because as you stated very clearly, it's just kicking it down like just a year from now. That's ridiculous. Yeah. So that, as far as I'm concerned, that's off the table. And I will tell you this, I'm getting second thoughts about the GET too, if it relates to this emergency. Because that's not what I intended. My support was never based on balancing the budget or anything like that. It was always to look prospectively, to diversify our revenue stream. It was, my support was never, to use it as an emergency stopgap measure. So, I still support it somewhat, but you would think logically that more than ever I'd be supporting that thing. But actually, it never was my intent to use it as an emergency thing. Now we just have to deal with it. Like any household, you get an emergency, you got to deal with it already. So if we got to cut services, we got to cut services. Thanks.
Councilmember Leroy?
Thank you. And I appreciate what Ms. Ruggles is trying to do. She's trying to move us in a direction on, where we go from here. And then, Mr. Chung just kind of continued that conversation. I too will not support another real property tax increase. I think the other part of this conversation that is missing is not only are we trying to provide funding for this dynamic event, we have to start looking down the road. And I had an amendment that moved money from tourism, but now more than ever, I am reconsidering that thought because we need to start thinking about revenue generation through our tourism industry, which we are getting a lot of mixed messages, not only here but abroad. And so some of the GE numbers was based on a very robust tourism number, and that we're seeing is tapering down based on the events. So as we discuss this as colleagues, I don't want to forget the piece of, yes, we have to take care of this emergency situation, but we also have to plan for the future and ensure that there'll be some revenue generation 2, 3, 5 years down the road, which will then hopefully create a more robust real property tax collection. I mean, I think we're having to look at this through a multi-pronged approach, and that's what I needed to share to the rest of you as far as where my thoughts are going with all of this. So I yield at this time. Thank you.
Councilmember O'Hara?
Okay, we do have options, but none of them look really that great. And I'm going to bring Mr. Yi back up if he'll come. As Deanna has pointed out several times, the surplus that we have in the geothermal funds lies within the Community Benefit Fund. This is the most accessible fund, and it is up to Mr. Yi to make approvals on that fund. And if we're looking at an amount in the neighborhood of $3 million, we do have that in that fund without violating the rules as they currently exist. What are your thoughts about releasing that? Because that's not borrowing. This is money that we have in the bank.
Michael Yee, Planning Director. Not too long ago, there was a proposal to fund Wi-Fi through the benefit fund. And we heard a lot from the community around using those funds for a community benefit and not for possible relocation. And that was a very vocal outcry against it. Given that there is the other half of it, not financially, but the other side of it, which is relocation, given current events, would we not see a uptick in folks wanting to relocate now? So that's one question that I'm not sure if people were against it for Wi-Fi, are they going to be against it to use it for a lava event?
Mr. Yi?
Yes.
That would presume that the plant was operating. The plant is no longer operating. This is where we find ourselves today. And if they can cap the 11th well and quench it, or whatever the correct term is, the community will be a lot safer. The outcry wasn't just about relocation. It was about expending the money to keep the community safe. And when and if PGV ever attempts to come back online, which it may not, the longer that plant stays shut, the more likely it never will reopen. That's the facts. I don't know that you'll see an outcry from those people on use of this money to mitigate what's happening in Puna. I don't think you will. But I've been dealing with them on a daily basis. Many of them are evacuees. Many of the people that you spoke with are not in the neighborhood right now. They're staying with friends and relatives elsewhere. but I am encountering them and talking to them online on a daily basis. And that was a different situation. That was business as usual. This is not business as usual. The geothermal plant is shut down. And the likelihood of it reopening, we don't know. That's going to be up to the public in large regard, because there'll be a huge response from the public if that plant is attempted to be reopened in the future sometime. That's all I can tell you.
Well, and so in response to that, I would say the fact is it's not completely shut down, and doesn't mean we won't get applications for relocation. And to draw a conclusion today that it's POW and all done, and we can start expended, I think is premature to say that too. And given the timeline of having to make decisions around the budget, I don't know the likelihood of that. Again, I'm not saying we can't use it. I'm not saying I wouldn't afford it as a request to you folks. But I would expect that you're going to have to listen to what the folks impacted by PGV, what they're going to feel about it. I mean, I wasn't around when they created this fund and have questioned about it in the past.
I would imagine they would say we can use it as long as we prevent it from reopening. That's probably going to be the tune that comes out of this. But and that's actually, in my opinion, a reasonable request given the course of events here. Alco is not having any problem keeping the lights on. We have excess capacity without PGV. They're already planning a future without PGV. I've met with them and continue to meet with them. But as far as the fact that PGV is not left island, but they are not operating, which means we have no revenue coming into that fund anymore. I think we're still holding 3 unsold homes, which will probably be worth about a nickel on the dollar right now. But other than that, there's not going to be any revenues. That's from the royalties of the sale of electricity to Helco, which is no longer being produced. And what it took to get them to get the pentane off of the site was ridiculous. The public is not real happy. And the reason they're not happy is they took forever to start quenching the wells. And they still are not quenched. Because the one that they're having problems with has been a problematic well for 30 years. The public knows all of this. All these facts are recorded. So I think I kind of understand the public view on PGV. They want to see that it remains permanently closed. I know the problem for Helco is it reduces the percentage of their profile from renewables, which is a problem given the state's goals to get 100% renewable by 2040. Still yet, they have other options for bringing renewables online, and they do have enough capacity in their existing plants without PGV being online. So that's going to make that argument even more strong to keep it from coming back online. I can't tell you what the outcome will be. I'm not going to take sides in this argument. I'm just analyzing what I'm seeing in the public and what the facts are in terms of generation right now. So that is the most easily available money that we have at this point in time. And because it only takes director discretion to release it. The rest of the funds we would be borrowing from to pay back. This is not a necessarily payback situation. And it has put the community through a lot of trauma, the risk that they are concerned about because of the slow response of geothermal on all of this, the pentane and the closing of the wells. So I think we have an argument to make here. I just wondered if you want to mull it over, because it's a very important piece.
I'm just going to reiterate that it's not about me just releasing the funds. Okay, so it's not that simple. I think, again, I'm not here supporting or not supporting PGV. That's not the question. The ordinance was written partially for the relocation of folks impacted by the PGV. I get that if the plant remains closed, that could be kind of a mute question at that point, but we're not at that determination today. And again, I don't know how fast we can act on these things by the time a decision for budget needs to be made. So again, I'm open to it, but I don't have a conclusion for you today.
Thank you. And we're going to take a 15-minute break, but I see Councilmember Chung, so maybe just right after your...
I have a question.
Sure.
Given the nature of this matter, are we going to get to speak more than 3 times? If not, I'm not going to say anything. Is that?
No.
You know, I only talk 1 minute at a time.
Yeah,
right?
no, definitely. I'm just keeping track of how many rounds so that everybody has a fair time. But go ahead and then we'll take a 15-minute
I just want,
break.
every so often I just want to give my colleagues a glimpse into what I'm thinking about in terms of things when we formulate some kind of decision. I certainly understand where Ms. O'Hara is coming from. And, she is fighting, she has the pulse of that community and their welfare, in mind. But for the same reasons that I eventually voted or stated my opposition to using some of those geothermal monies, might be a little bit different fund, but those geothermal monies for, some computers or whatever it was down at Pahoa, I gotta say it's probably an improper use of the funds. It's not geothermal related. I mean, that's just my thought. Yeah, I don't make that decision, but, I gotta agree with Director Yi in many regards. I just had to state my opinion on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a 15-minute break. Thanks.
Yeah, this is a CH-53E Super Stallion helicopter, and it's a Marine Corps helicopter that's designed for moving passengers and cargo in combat. And we're here now essentially to help use that capacity to help our Hawaiian friends in their time of need and conduct mass evacuation if needed. We got here on Tuesday, and then we assumed the tasking yesterday on Thursday. There's an entire Title 32 or National Guard structure under a dual status commander, and we're on the active component of that, and specifically the aviation component even underneath the active component. So, so we're working very closely with locals here, Hawaiian, National Guard members. It's 43 passengers plus a 4-man crew. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we've actually increased the capacity. These are configured solely for passenger carrying. So to maximize the lift that we can do. The evacuation zones are specifically designed to be away from the lava flow, so south of the actual East Rift area, and then in an area that is hopefully safe enough that people can get to it in time. The isolation is the key, and from my understanding, the air quality is a big concern for the public. That we're worried that the hydrogen sulfide and the other toxic industrial chemicals that can be in the air might cause people to have to get to these zones and have us get them out. Keep in mind that our crews are trained, and these helicopters are designed to go into extremely austere, unprepared zones, right? So we're trained to kind of look at a map, get a general feel for where we'd like to land, and then go out, take a look at those zones, and then decide on those zones. So we actually had a lot of help from our Army partners on that. They were here months in advance of us, watching out for us and doing some of that pre-planning for us. So I'm really, really happy to have some of that pre-planning. We're deferring to the leadership of the JTF 50, but from my understanding, the biggest triggers here are the air quality, the lava flow itself. Essentially, as the residents know, moves very slowly, but the air quality is a big concern that the levels reach dangerous levels, especially for the elderly and the young, and that the lava may isolate areas where then it's difficult or impossible to evacuate. We are currently scheduled to be here until Monday. It's our last day of support, but the extensions and the time is in work right now to keep us here longer if needed.
Take us up to the summit, learning today that the crater within Halemaumau has grown in 3 weeks to some 14 acres up to more than 90 acres. Yes. That's obviously a drastic change. What, if anything, does it mean?
Well, it has great meaning. The current Halemaumau was formed by explosions in 1924. Previous to that, previous to the explosions, Halemaumau was half the diameter that it is today. So, we are seeing 1924, many aspects of 1924 over again, and one of them is the widening of the actual event down to whatever's down there. But we're also learning a great deal about how these explosions occur. We're getting more information as they continue. And one of the interesting findings is that they may be more related to gas than steam as we once thought. And our senior geologist, Don Swanson, is looking at all that data, and he is beginning to think that maybe the steam blast idea was not quite accurate, and then that's causing him to look back at 1924 when they had far less instrumentation or analytical capabilities, and thinking that maybe 1924 wasn't a steam blast either, that it was the same mechanism, more like gas pressurization and expansion, explosion. But there are some instrumental measurements that contradict that. So as science goes on, we keep asking questions, but that's basically it.
So in general, we have approximately 400 customers without power, primarily in the Leilani Estates and Lani Puna Gardens area. We are not proceeding with any repairs or power restoration in those areas right now. In fact, the last time I reported, our strategy was to go in and try and shore up and strengthen some of the poles and clear some of the down poles off the roadways. We are no longer doing that. When we were in the process of trying to do that, we had fissures become active again. We had emissions from some fissures, and our crews had to be evacuated quickly. So our strategy now is to keep them out of the area and keep them safe. Our primary mission is to keep you safe, but also to keep our personnel safe. So we're not responding in those areas. As far as the total power system, we have adequate generation. Every other day we get news saying we're running short, we're going into rolling blackouts. That's not true. Again, that is not true. Even without PGV, we have enough generation to supply all of our customers. The margins are less, but we still have enough, and we're managing our maintenance of our other power generators to make sure that we have enough on an ongoing basis. If the situation changes, we will let you know. We will send out a press release letting you know that the situation has changed. Going forward, we are going to restrict some of the response of our personnel until we can get further definition on the situation, primarily in the Kalapana area. We have large vehicles that have to cross the state highway, so we want to minimize the crossing. And also, we need to ensure that there's an evacuation plan for our employees. So we're going to be a little more restrictive. We're not going to do plant maintenance in those areas. We're going to respond if there's a down conductor or some kind of emergency, but it's going to be restricted. And we're going to try and primarily do it during daytime hours. As far as the ash can cause problems on our power system. What happens with the ash is it can coat our insulators with conductive materials so that the insulator can then have a short circuit. So we're monitoring all of the facilities around the summit area and all the way down to Ka'u. So far, no impact. There hasn't been enough ash deposits to cause a problem in our power system, but we continue to inspect those areas to make sure that it doesn't become a problem. To remedy that, we would need to wash off the ash deposits, and in order to do that, we may take some planned power interruptions in order to do that. What we want to make sure is that we'll do planned interruptions so that we don't have long, extended, unplanned power interruptions. So if we need to do that, if we need to do planned maintenance to wash off the insulators, we will let you know. We'll send out press releases. We have moved our community center to county council offices here in Pahua. We're going to be there on Thursdays from 9:30 to 3 p.m. We're also right here. You can go to the site if you have any questions for us. Although we're not doing any power restoration, we are taking information from customers to know where they are, to know what the state of their dwelling is, or their facility, so that when activity subsides, then we'll be prepared to restore your power. So we'll be right over there taking information. Thank you.
Hey, this is Wendy Stovall. So today we are still seeing continued activity in both locations on Zone and at the summit. This is kind of more of the same that we've been seeing over the past few days. The eruptive activity in the lower East Rift Zone is continuing to migrate back to the west along the fissure line. There's an approximately 2-mile long line of activity of fountaining, low fountaining of lava, and then those fountains are feeding massive lava flows that are channelized going down to the coast. There's 2 primary channels that are going down from the locus of activity, and the easternmost channel has split into 2 down at the coast, so now there are 3 ocean entries at the coast. Lays is issuing off of those ocean entries, and hopefully we'll get a weather update to talk a little bit about that. There seems to be a lot of lava being produced by Fissure 7, and that is in Leilani State. The flows themselves are moving a little bit to the north, but mostly to the south from that point. And we have field crews on the ground there monitoring the progress of that. They've had a hard time getting closer to those flows because they are so voluminous. And then if we go up to the summit is pretty socked in today. It's very cloudy, and so we haven't had a whole lot of great visual observations of what's happening at the summit, but we do have some observations from cameras that are up on Mauna Kea. I'm trying to get the exact information about where these images are coming from, but we've seen a couple of plumes rise above the clouds from imagery coming from an observatory on Mauna Kea, and we did see a plume go up to about 6,000 feet above sea level, 6,000 to 7,000 feet above sea level this morning, but it was just a minor explosion. And then yesterday afternoon, one went up to about 8,000 feet. And then yesterday at about 5 p.m., there was a magnitude 3.9 earthquake at the summit of Kilauea. That's the general update for today.
Good morning, everyone. We continue to see the trade wind pattern as has been being briefed for the past couple of days. This trade wind pattern means generally winds are from the northeast and the lower levels. I do want to highlight that today's winds are expected to be the strongest that we've seen all week and that we should see in the coming days, with gusts up to between 20 and 25 miles per hour possible. I mentioned these stronger winds mainly because if there is an explosion or plume that occurred at the summit, as Wendy has just briefed, there's been a few, we could see the ash being carried a little farther downwind than we have seen in the past couple of days. However, because of this northeast wind, we are still going to continue to see the plume going to the southwest, pretty much from the summit down Highway 11 down to Pahola. I also want to note, though, too, with these gustier winds, the winds can also pick up any ash deposits that have recently fallen and can result in dusty conditions, possibly even reduced visibility. We haven't had that report yet, but it is a potential with the gustier winds. As such, the National Weather Service is continuing to issue a special weather statement in effect for the Cal District, accounting for these hazards pretty much until further notice. One thing of note, Wendy was talking about the different plume heights. From a sounding that the Weather Service did earlier today, for your information, it would take a plume height of around 15,000 feet above ground level to have any ash interaction with any of a westerly flow, which would be taking it more towards the Gila direction. So again, it would have to get to around 15,000 feet. Most of the plumes and explosions we've seen in the past couple of days have been between the 5,000 to 8,000 feet above ground level, which is why we are seeing the ash mainly on the northeast trade winds heading down to the southwest from the summit along Highway 11. And then turning our attention to the areas around the fissures, that northeast flow is impacting down there as well. During the day, around the fissures, we do get the winds turning a little bit more to the west during the overnight hours, but they do weaken during the overnight, so we don't see too much of a turn in direction necessarily of any of the fog. So as long as the sulfur dioxide is being emitted from the fissures, we do expect the development of the fog in the vicinity of the fissures, and that northeast flow carrying them to the south and the west. And that looks to be ongoing for the time being. Also mentioned about the lays. With this flow, any of the lays that does form as the lava is entering the ocean should keep the threat immediate around where that lays is forming at the coastline, or taking it out a little into the ocean. And one last thing I wanted to touch on, because Wendy did mention about the earthquake. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center is monitoring every earthquake activity. No tsunami threats at this time by any means, but just to make you aware that we are continuing to monitor every single earthquake that does occur, and products will be issued as needed.
Unfortunately, we do have a little bad news. That bypass line that we did run down Pohiki Road was covered by lava on Friday. But prior to that, we had already started plans for, I think what Tom Mitch had mentioned earlier, is to outfit the well that near Green Lake Tank. So unfortunately, that well hasn't been in operation for over 20 plus years. There's no power to the site, but we've already sent crews out there to evaluate the system. We have equipment coming in as we speak. We have crews working on access to the property. So we hope to get that up and running in a matter of about a week or so. So again, we apologize for that disruption in service, but we're committed to continue to keep water flowing to those areas of Pohoiki, Kapoho Vacation Land, and beach lots. As soon as we can get that restored, we'll get that restored to you folks. Other than that, we'll be available over there off to the side if there's any detailed questions. Thanks.
Give it to the next person who needs it. It's got come with karma for I don't know whatever it's worth.
808.
Did it calculate everything?
It's there.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, it's okay right now. You know, I've been on the south side, and that's the baddest side.
What's that like right now?
Just everything is just brown, dead. Yeah.
From the air.
From the air.
Yeah.
And the ground. Yeah. Advise nobody to go in that section anyway, unless you have a house in there, but you gotta go in with a four-wheel drive. You know, it's all volunteer work, yeah. Yeah, but I kept this neighborhood watch thing going because I was one of the founders for it. When it first started off, it was really bad. Then they said there were like close to 30 people coming in here and looting, and they caught maybe one or two. Right now it's kind of cool down, you know. Just stay safe if you're out and about here, yeah, especially. I know everybody wants to get in here to look at the activity going on, which is normal, but just gotta be aware and alert as you go around Mililani.